What to do? What to do? What to do? What to do?
For the first part of the program here, we are going to focus on the Sustainable and Autonomous Communities Initiative Spotlight on Cherán, Michoacan. If you've been following along, I have been spending some time down in Acapulco, Mexico from October through mid-December. I was down there with my family, my lovely partner Rebecca, and we had one heck of a time. We were enjoying the beach, enjoying the community, the amazing food, the amazing affordability, just soaking up the Mexican culture. We're also doing some great work as well on my company and on the nonprofit Center for Natural Living. And we had the opportunity to drive back. We flew down with my kiddos, and then we drove back with Catherine, the mother of my kiddos, her partner Paulo, and me and Rebecca and Stara and Bill, and we had the awesome ability to stop through Cheran in Michoacan, one of the most violent states in Mexico. Cheran is a town, a small city of 18,000 people. And in 2011, this amazing community of people overthrew the local police, kicked out all of the politicians, and they did this in response to the local cartel groups that were illegally logging their forest, their bosque. And of course, the forest has been an integral part of their community and their culture, going back many generations, back to the indigenous people that occupied the place before. The cool thing about Cheran, I should say, is that it's many indigenous people that are still there. And Michoacan is just, there's a lot of mountains and big hills, and they have remained relatively uninfluenced and untouched by both the Spanish conquistadors, although they did take over and have some influence, but not as much as in other areas. And I even did some research and found that the folks in Cheran were able to push back the Aztec Empire, which I thought was pretty impressive. So you have this community with these deep-rooted ties and family ties in the same space. And for a while, as in most of the rest of Mexico, the cartel groups and the gangs were working in conjunction with the local law enforcement and the politicians. And they were extorting people, they were kidnapping people, they were abusing people, they were humiliating people, and they were cutting down the trees. They were cutting down the trees to take them out to sell them to other communities. They were also clear cutting in order to create space to grow avocados. And the people were just fed up with it. And after years and years of abuse and missing persons, and they had a curfew in the community, people weren't able to go out after dark, and that must have been terrible for business. It was a really bad situation. They finally had enough and said, basta ya, which means enough is enough. And really, it was the women and the children that rose up first. It was just such a blessing, and I feel so grateful that we were able to go and visit with these community leaders. We sat down with a gentleman named Santiago, who's the president of their comité, which we'll talk about here. Not only did they overthrow the local police and kick out the politicians, but they created their own system of governance, which is actually a throwback to their indigenous form of governments, which was based on direct democracy and consensus. Really incredible stuff that they are doing there. We're going to be sharing some video clips and some excerpts from some of the footage that we captured. And later on, we'll be creating a full episode of our Sovereign Living series, documenting our experience in Cheran, Mexico. But it was the women that started this uprising, and this what do they call it? Levantate, like getting up, standing up, and they were fed up with it. The cartels would take the logs that they had just cut down in trucks through routes throughout the town. And one day the women organized, they gathered in this town square. We're going to show you a clip of that. And they set up a barricade and big rocks and blocked the trucks. And then the community pulled the truck drivers out of the trucks. They took their logs back. They were angry. They smashed up these trucks. It was quite the experience, I imagine, and it was so great to be in that spot. So we're going to play a clip for you right now of the little church square courtyard where this all took place.
This is the Calvarium where the people start to reunite. And this street was the street where all the big trucks full of trees was going up and down. And then this is the original place where the rebellion begins, where the people start to rebel against all the men that was going on.
Aquí es donde comenzó todo el movimiento, la lucha. Aquí es donde las mujeres decidieron parar a los carros que bajaban del monte con la madera. Aquí los pararon y aquí se empezó a juntar la gente para combatirlos.
It's just super cool to be there with these community leaders and people that took part in the uprising. We later did, or actually before that video, we did an interview with like 8 community leaders, including some of the women that were there for the original uprising and the men that were there. And it was just, we did a whole hour-long interview. We'll be bringing you excerpts from that in the future, and we'll be cutting it into a nice little polished thing. I speak Spanish, más o menos, hablo español, so it was good to have a translator there, but Paulo was there also. He's Italian, which is a closer language to Spanish, but we've really been picking up the language pretty well being down in Mexico so long. You really have to immerse yourself in it. After they showed us that area, they took us up the road, and we actually drove into the mountains and the forest, and we got to experience what it was like where they would cut down the trees, and they're letting the forest regrow naturally, which I think is absolutely amazing, but they're also doing some reforestation efforts. And later on that afternoon, they took us to this facility they have where they're regrowing the pine trees, and they just have these massive greenhouses, and they're popping them out and planting them all over. They also collect the sap, which is, again, the forest is extremely important to them. They collect the sap, and they turn it into like turpentine, so you can use for cleaning products and stuff. They actually export it to Japan and China, which I thought was absolutely incredible. There's not very many small towns in Mexico that are doing that type of stuff. But let's play a clip for you. It turns out that the straw that broke the camel's back was was them taking out the forest, the trees, and the logs above this ancient indigenous that was used by the indigenous people, this spring. And the spring had fed people for generations and generations in this community. And when they started logging above it, turns out that the water was starting to dry out. So we're going to play a clip from the forest.
Es el que abastecía a toda la comunidad anteriormente.
Sí.
Over there.
This is where the water is.
Oh.
Yeah. This is like the spring water coming from the ground, and when they start and fed in this area, the loggers, the legal loggers, is when the women raise up, because this is a very like special place for the whole community, and like historically was the place where the community was coming to take the water to drink. This was the place.
He was just telling me that before the movement and the uprising, the people of Cherán wouldn't come up here because the malos, the criminals, controlled this territory. And ever since they overthrew the cartels and the corrupt, crooked government, the people returned to the forest, and it's peaceful up here. And people can utilize the forest. Earlier we saw a gentleman that was coming up to collect the resin and tree sap, which is used to make products and health products that they sell at the market and that they use for natural health. I can't begin to tell you how rich this experience was to hang out in this amazing community. It was so peaceful and tranquil, and there's children just running around playing in the public square, and there's markets, and everyone's out and about. You could sit down, of course, at the food vendors. It was incredible. I imagine it's a big contrast to what it was before they rose up. Now let's talk about the political autonomy and the government that they formed. So they overthrew the existing municipal government, and they instituted a new form of government where essentially they divided the town into 4 barrios, 4 neighborhoods, and once every 3 years they hold what's like elections. I should also add that political advertising is banned in the community. And coming in and out of the city, there's 4 entrances and exits. They have checkpoints, armed basically militia, the community police, which is comprised of people in the community, making sure that there's not contraband, there's not criminals coming in, there's not gang members, and they're also checking for political bumper stickers, because whenever the presidential elections are going on in Mexico, you cannot have any political signs or any political party affiliation in Cheran, which I think is absolutely cool. In the interviews, they spoke a lot about how that creates more unity and cohesion. There's not division amongst the families and the community because they support this particular party, they support the opposition party, which I thought was incredible. So they split the town up into 4 barrios. Once every 3 years, they call for these meetings. The meetings take place where everyone comes out from the community. They have massive participation. Almost everyone participates, and they nominate. They take turns nominating people. They give like a 3 or 4 minute speech about why they want to nominate someone. And then that community, that barrio, the neighborhood, chooses from their own people that live in their area who's going to be on the town council, which I think is like 8 people or so. You have to be 45 years or older. You serve a 3-year term. And the town council oversees the local police force, the militia police, the community police, called Comunidad Rotunda. And they drive around in their own trucks, and they like hijacked all the stuff from the local police. And they oversee the reforestation efforts. And lately, they've been working on economic growth and encouraging some economic activity and entrepreneurship. It's awesome in Mexico, the level of entrepreneurship that's there, and the mom and pop shops, and the children that are participating in the family business as well. It's absolutely incredible. And I should mention, this is an experiment of anarchy in action, of autonomous government taking place, of a true people's government, self-rule. It's incredible. I should mention, some people will be like, well, what's the crime rate like? How are these community police actually working out? The crime rate is way lower than anywhere else in Mexico. Michoacan is one of the most dangerous states in all of Mexico, with the highest murder rate per capita. And in Cherán, that is not the case. I believe one of the statistics I saw said that they had like 9 murders since 2011. So that's 9 murders in 7 years. That's a lower murder per capita rate than here in Austin, Texas, the great progressive bastion in Austin, Texas. So I thought that was absolutely incredible. And the reason, I mean, the only crime that there's like petty crimes. They told me that there was 1 carjacking that took place since 2011, and they were able to recover the car. There's drunken, disorderly conduct, bar fights and stuff like that. But other than that, it is chill and everyone feels safe. And it's absolutely incredible, the dichotomy when the people rose up. And one thing that's really cool and interesting about Mexico is governments all over the world are corrupt. And I think in the United States, people that are watching this program probably already are well aware of that. But I think the U.S. does a better job of disguising it, and a lot of more people are in the dark, the Republicans and Democrats that are just go along to get along, normies as some people call them. But in Mexico, everyone you talk to knows that the local police and the government, the federal, state, local governments are all corrupt. That's just the way things are. And I think it's absolutely inspiring and makes me feel optimistic about the future prospects for liberty, not just in Mexico, but all across the world, that so many people are beginning to stand up, and it's happening in a small, decentralized, bottom-up way. It's not a massive national revolution that's taking place in Mexico. It's taking place locally with indigenous peoples that are standing and rising up. Now, and again, this was an awesome experience. We went there as part of the Sustainable and Autonomous Communities Initiative with the Center for Natural Living, centerfornaturalliving.org. Rebecca's been doing a lot of great work to get this organization off the ground. We're going to be continuing to bring you some of the videos and interviews and some more polished production of what we learned there. But some of my takeaways, I believe one of the reasons why this uprising was able to be so successful and why their government has so much cohesion now is because the people in Cherán share a common bond of their indigenous background and their ancestry. There aren't really outsiders in the community. It's not a boiling pot or just people from all sorts of different walks of life. It's very homogenous, right? I know people in the alt-right community are like, we want a homogenous, all-white, Western European culture, right? Well, this is something that happened naturally and organically. there wasn't external influence, and there's not a whole lot of mestizo blood, right? So originally it was all indigenous, Aztec, Inca, Mayan in Mexico and Central America, and then the conquistadors came from Spain in 1521, and they conquered Mexico, and now all of a sudden there's this mixed race called mestizo, where it's Spanish, Western European, it's European blood mixed with Mexican blood, and you could tell the different looks that a lot of people have in Mexico. There's lighter skin, and interestingly enough, it's the lighter skin, higher bloodline mestizo Europeans that run the federal government, of course. But that's not the case in Michoacan as much, and especially in Cheran. And I think this cohesion, this common bond, enabled them to rise up and to stay together after the uprising. Because oftentimes when the existing infrastructure and institutions are overthrown, it creates a power vacuum. And more often than not, it seems like there's something, a more worse situation takes place. So I wanted to juxtapose that with the situation in the United States of America, where it is a melting pot, it is a boiling pot. There's not as many common cultural backgrounds. Now, there is one thing that a lot of Americans, not even a lot of Americans, actually, to be honest with you, but that tie to that rugged individualism and American freedom, right? A lot of times it's a freaking fraud, to be frank. So I don't know what it would take for an uprising of the Cheran sort in America. I think really before people take the risk, they risk it all. They risk their lives. They risk their property. They risk their position in the community. Before people, most importantly, they risk their lives. Before people take those risks, things have to get really, really bad. And I think for like African American populations and poor folk here that were being abused by the police, things were getting real bad. That's why we saw the whole Black Lives Matter and all the protests throughout the country. Although that seems like it's kind of fizzled out. So things would have to get really bad in this country. And unfortunately, there's so much division, which is why it's so great in Cheran that they kicked out political parties. Because right now, there's so many Americans that are fighting one another, Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, Clinton, Trump, so on and so forth, even though damn libertarians are fighting each other on Facebook and stuff. That didn't exist in Cheran. And so I think in order for the conditions to be ripe for uprising and autonomous government here, self-rule in America, things are going to have to get a lot worse, and people are going to have to set aside their differences and focus on their common problems. Not fight against each other, but fight against the man who is responsible for the oppression, the harm, the wars, the crony capitalism, and all that good stuff. Now, when I say politically autonomous in Cheran, it's not 100% sovereign. It's not a sovereign community. They are still under some authority from the state of Michoacan and the federal government. Now, the federal government has recognized them as an indigenous community, which gives them certain rights and privileges. They still kick up some taxes to the state of Michoacan as well. And I believe, I didn't get in, we went to breakfast with some of the community leaders, and we went to dinner afterwards. It was amazing. We were able to really pick their brains. And I believe one of the taxes that they have is a land tax. Not even a tax on the improvements on your home, but it's a land tax. Maybe like a Henry George style thing, a Georgism, which is just strictly land tax, the amount of land that you have, and doesn't penalize you for putting improvements. And so while I'm all for no taxation, and some people would say this is an anarchist government, an anarchist society in Cheran, it's not necessarily anarchist. They do have some hierarchy, and there is an institution chosen by the people that holds some authority. Now, I should say that one of the reasons why it makes it unlikely for this institution to be corrupted is because they have very little power. There's not a bunch of regulations. They're not in the pockets of all of the businesses, and they're not a nanny state whatsoever. So it's like, why would they even try to take it over in the first place? What benefit? There's no ability to corrupt. Obviously, there is opportunity for that, but I think it's highly unlikely. So while it's not completely 100% sovereign, it's not completely 100% anarchist, it's a great example of a people coming together and having a truly direct democracy government. Now, if someone didn't want to participate, I imagine they'd still have to pay taxes and such, but I think this is a wonderful example of how people can overthrow an external institution that doesn't represent them, that doesn't have their values in line, and instead exercise some self-rule and some self-governance. Really cool stuff happening in Cheran Michoacan. We're going to be doing some more work. We want to meet with the community again. We want to do some surveys to see how we could help the community out, and check out anarchapulco.com. Some of the leaders from the community, some of the original folks that participated in the uprising, they're supposed to be sending like a delegation of 40 people to the Anarchapulco conference in mid-February. So definitely check that out. If you're going to be going to the conference, you'll definitely want to participate in their talks, and we're hoping to continue to work with them and to continue to build some bridges. So this has been our Sustainable and Autonomous Communities Initiative Spotlight on Cherán, Michoacan. Again, that's a project of the Center for Natural Living, centerfornaturalliving.org.